What's up, sports fans? All right, Super Bowl 58 is over. The Chiefs have won. Patrick Mahomes MVP again. Oh my goodness, what a game. What an underwhelming game overall, I would say. Obviously ending in overtime and the way that it did, and Patrick Mahomes taking over and solidifying the Chiefs dynasty is awesome. But the game itself, overall, from the start through the fourth quarter, was really, I would say, underwhelming. A lot of great things happen. Let's go through it. So such an interesting game. Let's go kind of quickly, quarter to quarter. We'll just kind of do reaction style. We may do another video with a complete review and breakdown, top to bottom. We'll go through why San Francisco lost this football game, why Kansas City won this football game, and really give it the time it deserves. But today, as far as the reaction goes, first quarter, San Francisco started off with a decent drive down the field, ending in that McCaffrey fumble. They really started off dominating up front. O-line looked good. McCaffrey looked really, really good, but unfortunately he did fumble the football. That's the first time in about 400 touches that he had done so. KC went 3 and out at that point on their first possession. Trent Williams actually had a few penalty issues there up front in the first quarter. Chase Young coming up big with a sack. The San Francisco defensive line really looked good up front. Really both sides of the ball, offensive line, defensive line, they really controlled the game early on. It really looked to me from the outset that San Francisco made an effort to not have a slow start. They had really done so the first two playoff games, and they clearly came out with maximum effort, strong effort up front on both lines like we just said, and they made it a point not to start off slow. Purdy was actually very sharp in that first quarter. We'll go through his stats in detail down the road, but he looked really good up front. First quarter ended in a 0-0 tie. It's the 10th scoreless first quarter in Super Bowl history. Second quarter started off with a Jake Moody 55-yard field goal. That is a Super Bowl record at the time. That makes it 3-0 San Francisco. Mahomes goes 52 yards to McCole Hardeman. That's kind of the first big play of the game. Unfortunately, that drive then ends in a Pacheco fumble. Two big fumbles by the running backs there, ending what could have been game-making drives, to really kind of kick the game off well. Unfortunately, they both fumbled there and ended those drives. Early on into the second quarter, and really mostly the first half, Kansas City just could not get things rolling, so much so that there seemed to be some emotions boiling over on the sidelines, and there was a visible moment with Travis Kelce going to Andy Reid on the sideline, sort of catching him off guard and bumping into him. You could tell that Kelce was super worked up, just overly emotional, I thought, for that moment. I mean, they have been there before. The Chiefs had, Kelce has, and I'm surprised that happened. So that was a little bit concerning early on in the first half. I think into the second quarter, it was clear that both teams seemed very tight. Again, as I mentioned early on in the video, it was underwhelming, and it just started off that way. Not a lot of big plays, more punts than I expected. In my previous video where I preview Super Bowl 58, and in my prop bets video just before this as well, I really expected it to be a high-scoring game. It was not at this point. The game did not end up being a high-scoring game, as we know. Going in overtime was thrilling again, but it just was very underwhelming, and it seemed both teams came out very tight to start Super Bowl 58. Unfortunately, San Francisco caught a little injury there with Dre Greenlaw halfway through the second quarter. He left the game. I do not believe he returned, and you have to imagine that makes a difference there. They have to bring in some backups in the linebacker crew for San Francisco for the remainder of the game. The 49ers pass rush was really causing trouble, and that was the whole game. I would say Nick Bosa, again, with his pressure up front. Chase Young was a surprise on the other side. They really looked good. They controlled the ball on that side of the football, and they were causing trouble for Mahomes into the first half, even into the second half through that third quarter. San Francisco was finally able to break through with a pass back from Juwan Jennings to McCaffrey. It was a nice play design there, very risky play design. They actually had to get a key block from an offensive lineman there. Spencer Burford, I think, got the block there. If he does not make a block on the cornerback coming in to blow up that play before McCaffrey makes the catch, they may have had problems. But it was a great play design, and Juwan Jennings there for a TD makes it 10-0 San Francisco at that point. Everything kind of stalled out there as we left the first half. We had a Butker 20-yard field goal with 20 seconds left in the half, making it 10-3 San Francisco. The one noticeable thing, we mentioned it with Kelsey early on, was just the emotions that both offensive and defensively it felt like they were having on Kansas City's sideline. That really seemed to boil over. They just didn't seem to be themselves. They were lucky that San Francisco didn't take advantage. They have the early fumble there that could have been a score. They seem to be rolling. Purdy looked good early on. That seemed to stall out later into the second quarter. But really, as we go into halftime, it was a kind of a weird game at that point. So it was 10-3 San Francisco. So Kansas City, who had deferred to the second half, gets the ball and actually started off with a fumbled pitch to Pacheco. That was a bad way to start the second half. It seemed like things were really going to boil over from that first half, and tough way to start. Mahomes then had an interception for that first drive with an overthrow to Kelsey. He had 218 attempts, I think they said on the broadcast there, between interceptions. So he had been good up to that point, but things just looked bad. Even entering the second half, you're like, oh no, Chiefs not good. KC also had to take an early timeout in the second half, and they were unable to convert on a 3rd and 1. So things, again, just not looking great for Kansas City. Deebo Samuel had a little hamstring issue at that point. He did come back. It did not seem to affect him the rest of the game, but it looked bad there for a second. They showed it a few times on the replay. Again, not a huge problem. They had someone running on the field prior to the field goal by Butker. It was a 57-yard field goal at that point, which broke Jake Moody's then 55-yard field goal record. But just prior to that, they had someone running the field. Of course, Tony Romo sort of acknowledges it. They can't really acknowledge it on the broadcast. So that was interesting. So we had a Super Bowl record, and then that same record broken in the same day. That made it 10-6 San Francisco at that point. So outside of the field goals, the game turned into kind of a punt fest. I did not expect that. Really a bunch of punts back and forth. I'll get an exact number when we go through the prop bets finale there, but I really imagine it was over that 7.5 number. San Francisco then had sort of a fumbled muff punt. It bounced off a cornerback's foot as they were fielding it. Another turnover, so kind of a sloppy game even into the second half. KC then breaks through with a Valdez-Scantling reception TD. That was kind of off a nice combination route off of Kelsey. That made it 13-10 Kansas City. That was their first lead at the time here in Super Bowl LVIII. San Francisco's offense went on a lull. That started way back when, I'd say coming out of the first quarter when Purdy looked sharp. They went 101 real-time minutes before making a first down. So that's pretty interesting. That's we leave the third quarter in that state. So we enter the fourth quarter. San Francisco kind of reeling a little bit. They finally start to pick it up. They get a 4th down conversion to George Kittle, which leads to a Juwan Jennings touchdown reception. They actually had a blocked extra point coming off of that. It was kind of a low trajectory. Jake Moody extra point got blocked. Makes it 16-13 San Francisco at that point. Kansas City then has a long drive response leading to a short Butker field goal. Makes it 16-16 about halfway through the fourth quarter. Moody then another field goal for San Francisco, this time 53 yards with 1 minute 53 seconds left. That makes it 19-16 San Francisco at that point. So now enter Patrick Mahomes, the Michael Jordan of the NFL. Did not look great up to this point. Fumbles on a pitch, had the interception, just was not sharp all day. A minute 53 left in the fourth quarter, and in comes Mr. MVP. He looked comfortable. He looked in control. He looked confident at that point. He leads them on a long drive. Butker with a field goal with 3 seconds left. That makes it 19-19. Nothing happens on the ensuing drive from San Francisco, and they end up going into overtime. However, one thing I do want to mention before we leave this, we see Rashee Rice on the sideline sort of yelling at some offensive players, including Patrick Mahomes, as they show it coming back from the break entering overtime. He was open on a play that could have scored them a touchdown to win them the Super Bowl. So he's a little bit frustrated, probably not needed. Kind of leads back to that sort of ball of emotions that Kansas City seemed to be all day long. But this game is going to overtime, tied 19-19. So here we go. Super Bowl LVIII is going into overtime. It is the first overtime in 28 postseason games and the second in Super Bowl history. San Francisco ends up winning the toss by calling tails. They'll, of course, take the ball. Not much happens on that drive. They get a defensive hold on McDuffie on Juwan Jennings, who at that point I thought was having a fantastic game, was even in the conversation maybe for MVP. If Kansas City was to win the game, we know they did at that point. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a little bit. Kittle ends up going out with an injury. That was a little right shoulder thing. He did end up returning to the game. San Francisco then goes back to the run game with McCaffrey, really goes heavy back into that in the overtime session. I really thought they got away from that coming out of the first quarter. Through the second and third quarter, even towards the end of the game, they really didn't get back to that run game that had worked so well and that had worked well for them over the entire course of the season. Well, they finally get back to that in the overtime session. McCaffrey starts to take over. Purdy starts to make plays. He's extending plays with his athleticism, with his legs. Things are looking a little bit better for San Francisco now in the overtime. Now, they're not able to actually convert into a touchdown, but they do get a 27-yard Jake Moody field goal, bringing it to 22-19 San Francisco at that point in overtime of Super Bowl 58. Patrick Mahomes, that's all that needs to be said. Again, he was so calm in those moments that he had to be calm. There are very few players that in the highest of highest moments when you have to be perfect, he's able to do that. And I think the comparison always to Tom Brady, the quarterback before him that had the dynasty before his team had the dynasty. Patrick Mahomes is all of that. And he showed it again today in Super Bowl 58. In the late fourth quarter drive where he had to have the field goal to tie it. And then here in overtime, knowing he has to have points. He makes the plays. So McCole Hardman, they end up running kind of a nice play, fake motion across, which all day they had run that motion all the way across the field. Well, he fakes that motion, runs back the other way, and they throw the easiest quick touchdown pass to the right flat you'll ever see. I mean, it was almost so insignificant to play that the way the Super Bowl ended, it was like, oh my God, they just won. But, I mean, the play design was why that happened. And it's all about Andy Reid and that offense. But more than that, it's all about Patrick Mahomes, who was able to put them in that position. He used his legs and his athleticism perfectly at the end of the game and in overtime to get key first downs. It was just an amazing thing to see. He is him. I'll say it again. And he ends up winning Super Bowl MVP. This was actually the 7th longest game in the history of the NFL. Believe it or not, they did state that on the broadcast. Of course, the Kansas City Chiefs go back-to-back. This is the first time in 20 years since the New England Patriots in 03-04. And Patrick Mahomes wins MVP. This is his 3rd Super Bowl MVP. That's the second most, of course, to Tom Brady. And in the end, it was a fantastic end to a Super Bowl. We had what I thought was a great halftime show, a great opening. Not too much Taylor Swift. I think that ramped up as we got into the game. But in the end, Kansas City pulled it out. It was a great Super Bowl. Thanks for coming to check this out. Thanks for coming to my reaction video. Again, we'll probably do a full review. We'll look at stats. We'll answer all of the key questions, look at all the key players, all of those other fun factors that made Super Bowl 58 what it was. But for now, we're going to celebrate the Chiefs. It's going to be great. That parade's going to be fantastic. I'm sure all those Chiefs fans are just living the dream right now. Congratulations, Chiefs fans. Have a fantastic night. We'll see you guys on the next one.